Hello and welcome back, my stylish friends. This is second part to the video about how to place stitches in the first row. We were placing 4 different ways, and now I changed the color so we can go to row number 2 and show you 5 different stitch placements in any row after row 1. So we were doing regular stitch by placing stitch between 2 loops, and now when you do the same thing in any other row than row number 1, when you put your hook you should see 2 loops above your hook, and that's the regular placement of any stitch. As I mentioned in the other video, when we were placing stitches the same way in the first row, this stitch placement is not often used in the first row, but is 90% used in any other row after the row number 1. And the stitches you can see on both sides, those loops are hidden between the stitch. So let's move to the next one. We were doing back bump stitches in the first row, so let's do the same thing in the second row. You have to find your back bump, which is kind of sticking under the loops, and you just make your regular stitch you planning to do. I'm using double crochet stitch. So once you find your back bumps, they're very easy to recognize. I use this often, this stitch placement, because this stitch placement, if you're making on the wrong side, on the right side is creating a beautiful edge. So let's make one more and then I will show you how this stitch look like. So it's very nice, unique pattern, flat on the wrong side, and then on the right side you see nice edge sticking out, which is very decorative. Our next stitch placement in the first row was front loop, so let's place the same way in the second row. You have to find your front loop, which is always the closest to you, and what you do is just, you're not going here, that will be the back loop, you're going under the front loop. And of course there is a stitch placement where you can pick up that stitch different way, but with this exercise I want to show you how to regularly pick up the stitch in the front loop. Making stitches in the front loop and in the back loop are very similar. They look a little bit different because you're picking up the stitch different way. When you're working them in the front loop, you're picking up stitch from outside of your project, and you see this nice edge. When you're picking up in the back loop, which I will be starting right now, you have to find your back loop and it's the farthest away from you. When working back loops, you're picking up the stitch from the inside of your work. But this stitch placement also creates nice edge on each side. So once again, when you're making stitches in the back loop, you're placing your hook in between 2 loops, picking up the back loop only from inside of your work. Okay, I believe I have 2 more stitches to do here, and we can see the details in stitch placement difference. And let's look how our stitches look like. This is the wrong side first. So we have back loop, in the first row and back loop in the second row, front loop, back bump, and then through both loops in the row number 1 and row number 2. Now let's go to the right side, and right away we see visible decorative stitches on the right side, created by placing stitches in the different loops. So we have back loop, front loop, which looks very similar to the back loop, but the stitches are twisted different way. The next stitch placement is the back bump, which creates nice ridge on the right side. And then lastly we have through both loops, which is regular stitch placement. So these are the 4 different stitch placements, and I want to show you one more. I will change my yarn color again so we can truly see the beauty of the stitch placement. I always change my yarn color by removing the last loop and completing stitch with the new color yarn. I will make few regular through both loops double crochet stitches first, and I will pretend this is my wrong side. The reason I'm saying that is because this stitch placement, you should always be on the wrong side before you start making those stitches. So let's pretend this is our wrong side, and now we want to place stitches. We want to create nice ridge on the right side, similar to the one that we did in the back bump, but even more pronounced and more visible. So how to do that? You will place your hook under 2 loops, and then you come back under 2 loops in the second stitch. And that's the placement of the stitch. You just make regular stitch. I'm using double crochet. Once again, under both loops and coming back under both loops in my next stitch. So this is not front post or back post. This is making stitch between stitches. And let's do this again. It's very simple. You're making your stitch going under both loops, and then take your hook to the next stitch and go under both loops again and making the stitch. This is one of my favorite stitches when I'm making baby sweaters, because they're small size and I need something that will be flexible but has some decorative edge. Let me know if you ever tried this stitch or this is something new you just learned today. It's very simple and fast to make. How I mentioned, looks very pretty when you're using in the sweaters, or I used also when making hats. Will look pretty when making blankets as well, or scarf. So as you see, it's super fast. You're kind of making them without thinking. Just one more thing I want to tell you. Make sure you count your stitches, because you're making in between stitches. So if you make the whole row, you might miss one stitch. So always in the end or in the beginning of your row, you have to make a regular stitch to have the right amount of stitches in your row. Okay, so I just finished now as regular double crochet stitches. so we can see on the right side how the stitch look like. And my last one going through both loops. Okay, so this is the wrong side. As you see, it's less visible when you're going between stitches. The stitch looks kind of rise up and looks pretty. Now, when I go to the right side, that's what you see, the beautiful decorative edge picking up the yarn color from the previous row. It's more pronounced than if you're working in a back bump. But what I like about the stitch is very stretchable. It looks like you make slip stitches on top of your stitch, but slip stitch sometimes it's very tight. So I like using this one instead. Let me know if you learned something new and you like this video. Thank you for crocheting with me today and have a great day. I hope I will see you soon.